Today we're going to be talking about reactions and resistance checks in the new tabletop role-playing game. So let's head over and let's talk about it. So as you can see here, this is the reactions and resistance checks piece of the document. So we're going to head into reactions first. So reactions, while adventuring, players will have the ability to react to things in very dynamic ways. This plays directly into Essence, as each reaction pulls from the Essence pool that a player has access to. Reactions are presented as a way to emulate a much more realistic way for players, enemies, and NPCs to address situations. Reactions will be outlined in further detail in the expanded sections below. So we have how reactions work in combat and also in exploration. The social side is not represented here because that will be its own thing, but first up we do have combat. So you will have access to perform various reactions in combat. You can use a basic action to react to someone that approaches you or moves within your range. Or you can use specific mastery options that allow for reactions. When you choose to use a reaction, you must expend 1 essence to perform the reaction, augmenting the reaction as much as you would like, up to the total amount of essence that you have access to. If a creature uses a reaction on another creature, the target creature has the option to evade, but this will use an additional essence to perform. Reactions and exploration. You will have the ability to make reactions while exploring. When something within the exploration area happens, you have the option to make a reaction to whatever is happening with the required essence. For example, if something is falling near you, but not within range to hurt you, you have the ability to perform a reaction by catching the object, moving something else out of the way, or pushing something under the falling object. So here we have a very simple encounter that kind of shows how reactions work while in combat. So if the goblin, if it's their turn in alacrity order and they move up to this fighter here, the fighter has the option to use a reaction to attack the goblin as it approaches him. Now this will use 1 essence that the fighter has access to, which will bring the remaining pool of essence from 3 down to 2, but has the opportunity to do that, while the goblin has the ability to evade from this, and it will be a contest roll. So if the goblin opts to evade, then the goblin can do that, and there'll be a contest roll between the fighter and the goblin. If the goblin is successful, then the goblin evades the attacks, doesn't take any damage to warding, anything like that. But if the goblin fails, it still expends the essence for doing the evasion, and they also take damage to their warding. The fighter has the option to do this because the goblin is going to use 1 essence to move up and then 1 essence to attack. And then if the fighter decides that they want to, do a reaction to the goblin moving up and the goblin evades and is successful, that's all 3 essence of the goblin burned down right there. Yes, the goblin's going to move, the goblin's going to try to evade the incoming attack from the fighter, and then it's going to attack in response. That completely burns that character's turn out on the Oracle side. Whereas the fighter can opt to do that whether they want to or not, or take another mastery option as a reactionary thing. Now, if the goblin starts its turn within range and it wants to move away from the fighter has the ability to do a reaction once again, and the goblin has the ability to do an evade basic action if it would like to. That way it can get away, but it all comes down to the player. So if the fighter doesn't have enough essence in order to have a reaction to the goblin moving away, or if they opt to not do anything and the goblin gets to move away for free, then that comes down to player discretion. It's not an automatic thing where whenever you move away, then you get attacked, anything like that. It all comes down to player choice and player decision in that moment. Additionally, for reactions and exploration, we're going to say that these barrels that are right here are explosive barrels, and there's tripwires set up at each of these entrances that are going to trigger the barrels to explode. Now, if the player crosses the threshold and doesn't do any type of check to try to find, tripwires or any booby traps, anything like that, then it will trigger this to happen. Now, in this scenario, I, as the Oracle, would rule that the corridor is going to explode and fill with fire momentarily. So the fighter is not going to particularly take any damage on this specific scenario. that would be a resistance check to try to avoid it. But what the player can do is, since the ranger is in here, maybe the ranger noticed the trap, didn't disarm the trap, maybe they were adventuring ahead and they didn't have the ability to tell the party members that this was booby-trapped for whatever reason, then the fighter has the opportunity to do a reaction where they trigger the explosion to happen, and they're able to do a roll to determine if they can run in, you know, grab the ranger and run back out and carry both of them to safety so nobody takes any type of damage, anything like that. This is an exploration. This is an Oracle / player discussion where, is it feasible to do this? Because if you trigger something here, and let's say that there's like gunpowder, whatever may be on the ground here, then the character can react in very dynamic ways where it can try to put the fire out. It can try to stop the travel of the fuse to the barrels. It can try to save a party member that's in there. This is something that the Oracle and the players are going to have to work through, but it makes for very, very interesting exploration moments where you have areas set up like this, where they have the option to do a couple of different things, but nothing is particularly set in stone. This all comes down to the player wanting to react to something in a very interesting way, and the Oracle determining what type of rolls need to be made in order for them to react that way. So imagine during exploration, once a trigger happens, then everything kind of goes into bullet time for a second, and players have an opportunity to react to the scenario, unless the trigger for the mechanism is right up next to the barrels and there's not enough time to react. Those situations, the Oracle is going to have to kind of work through and determine, okay, this is a non-reactable, you know, scenario. This is a non-reactable trigger that happens here, and anybody that's within a certain range is going to take damage to warding, or there's going to be some other type of effect that's going to be put onto them. For resistance checks. So resistance checks is basically saving throws in a way. When a creature performs an action against another creature, there may be an opportunity for the target creature to perform a resistance check. A resistance check allows a targeted creature to resist the effect by rolling against the creature that initiated the action in a contest roll. Resistance checks will be outlined in further detail in the expanded sections below. To determine resistance checks, you must make a d20 roll and use the specified ability modifier to determine the outcome of the resistance check. So if we look at our player sheet here, our character sheet, our ability scores, Fortitude, Vigor, and Judgment, are going to be specifically for armor, physical attacks, magical attacks, but it's also going to play directly into how resistance checks works. So resistance checks in combat. During combat, when certain mastery options or basic actions are performed, you may be required to perform a resistance check. When you perform a resistance check, it does not consume an essence. Each mastery option will outline when a resistance check needs to be performed and what the outcome will be depending on the result of the resistance check. And resistance checks in exploration. In certain situations during exploration, you will have to perform resistance checks. This primarily happens when a trap or other environmental effect is triggered. When a resistance check is needed, the Oracle will ask the affected player to roll and explain what will happen on a failure and a success. After the Oracle explains the potential outcomes, the player will have the ability to provide what happens to their character based on the outcome of their resistance checks. The Oracle may provide additional comments as to what happens to the characters or the environment based on the feedback from the players. So in our scenario here, where the trigger mechanism for these barrels is right up on it and there's not enough time to react to it, this will require a resistance check. So whenever the player moves up, triggers this, then the Oracle can either have a contest roll from the explosion of the barrels, or they can set a flat DC for this specific situation, and the player must, meet or beat that target DC or win the contest roll in order to successfully resist what is going to be happening here. So whenever let's say in this scenario, I'm the Oracle and the player says, I want to approach these barrels. Whenever they get up within range of the trigger mechanism and the character doesn't do an expertise check to try to look for traps, and they actually trigger the trap, then the Oracle will say, okay, you stepped on a tile that's connected to these barrels, and the barrels are about to explode. I need you to make and we're going to look at the character sheet, a Fortitude, vigor, or judgment resistance check. Now, this is kind of where it comes down to the player or the oracle to kind of determine. Fortitude would basically be how you would resist the damage, right? Because fortitude plays directly into your defense, whereas judgment may be an optimal option in this scenario to see if they can judge the distance between, you know, a safe location and the explosion. So this is where the oracle and the players need to work together. I'm going to need you to do a resistance check. How do you, as the player, want to try to resist these effects? Well, I want to try to look for a safe place that I can jump to in order to resist taking any damage for this. Okay, that's a judgment resistance check. Roll a judgment resistance check to see if you make it behind. Okay, we'll say that this area right here and this area right here behind these pillars are going to be safe locations that you can have access to whenever you're doing this resistance check. Okay, I want to do a judgment resistance check and I want the player to move to the left pillar. Okay, do the resistance check. If it's successful, then the player is going to move to this, and then it can be animated or described however the player wants to describe it, or if they don't feel comfortable with it, then the oracle can describe it. So if the player's like, oh, I hear the click of the plate that I triggered, and I see the barrels, and on the side of the barrels I see, you know, warning explosives as, you know, vines start falling off of them, and I jump behind this pillar, and then they roll. Resistance check is successful and they're able to dive behind that pillar. If they're not comfortable with doing that, then the oracle can say, okay, you stepped on the trigger. You see as the ground begins to shake slightly, the vines reveal explosives on the barrel. You're going to dive and then roll behind this pillar. Make the resistance check. Bam. If the player's successful, then that happens. If the player's not successful, they may still perform the action. There may be a dive and a roll, or they dart around the corner, but they're not around the corner in time and they take a little bit of damage to their warding. So having these two topics kind of exist simultaneously in this video makes a lot of sense, because reactions are how you're going to actively react to the environment when you're not specifically in danger, whereas resistance checks is going to be how you react to things when you are in direct danger of something happening to you. And I think that this kind of goes hand in hand. Whenever you use a resistance check, whether it be in combat, anything like that, it's not going to consume any essence in order to do that, because you're trying to save yourself or resist the effect of whatever it may be. Whereas a reaction, you're not going to be in any immediate danger, so you have the option to use the essence if you want to be able to react to this situation. During exploration, like I said, you can react in very dynamic ways, where you can move something, push something, everything kind of goes into bullet time for just a second. Players that are within range have the option to make any type of reactions that they want to, whereas resistance checks is something that happens immediately. It's something that the players have to decide how they want to resist this effect. For example, if we went into the same scenario with the explosive barrels, if the character decided that they wanted to do a fortitude resistance check, and let's say that they had a shield, they could say that they plant the shield in the ground and then they get behind the shield, try to, you know, resist the effects of that as much as possible. Then the oracle and the player can go into the specifics of how the results of that roll will affect things. Maybe if they roll a nat 1 on the resistance check, maybe it breaks their shield, or it's completely unusable at that point. Maybe it affects the wall and it blows a hole in the wall and debris falls on the player. There's a couple of different interesting things that can happen there that keeps exploration very interesting, and it can kind of raise the stakes moment by moment by having these little trigger events that happen. Or it can provide some great roleplay scenarios where players have the option to do really, really cool things with their characters that's not combat focused, that's not socially focused, that just comes down to them navigating the corridors of some abandoned crypt, and they're able to do some really cool and fun things that make them feel like they are impactful, makes their decisions feel like that they are impactful. I really like this system a lot. Whenever you look at other tabletop role-playing games, reactions are just kind of baked in and is a set thing. It's like, oh, here's the criteria that needs to be met. Once all these boxes are checked, then this happens. Automatically this happens. And it's a pass-fail type scenario. I didn't like that too much. I wanted to put that in the player's hands. You know, here are all the essence or the action points that the player has access to. If you feel like you want to be a pure reactionary fighter or a pure reactionary character, you can do that. You can pick up mastery options that allow you to succeed by being specifically a reactionary player. Whereas you can opt to not take any of those reactions, completely ignore how reactions work, specifically in combat, and then you can just kind of float through in a very more straightforward type of way. This provides the flexibility that players need, and I think that a lot of players have been wanting as of recently, and I hope that people understand how these mechanics work. Having the ability to have reactions be something that is very important to the core of the game is going to allow for a lot of really interesting and creative ways of building characters out, and I think that that's going to allow players to feel like combat is a little bit more immersive in that way, where they can make these extra things happen that are considered reactions. It's, you know, it's not free, it consumes essence, but it's going to allow them to play how they would play in their head if they were writing the story, if they were actually there experiencing what is happening to them. Nobody is going to allow a creature to move up to them in real life or in any fantasy world and just stand next to them and attack them. That's not something that's going to happen. Now, in this, you have the option to allow that to happen if you want to, or you can attack them as they move up to you or within your range. So if you use pole arms or like ranged, you know, melee type weapons, if they move within 10 feet of you, they may not move to an adjacent square or an adjacent space to you, but they'll move within your range to try to skirt around you, and you have the option to do whatever you want to in that scenario. You can let them skirt by for free, you can attack them. It depends on what essence that the player has, and also how the player wants to react in that scenario. Adding reactions that cause effects like trips and grapples and things like that is definitely something that is going to be added in here. It's going to add a little bit more interesting dynamics to it. And I think that this is just going to empower the combat system and make it better, and also the exploration system. But be sure to let me know what you think in the comments down below. What are your thoughts on how reactions play out in this system and how resistance checks play out in this system? And are you a fan of the contest rolls for resistance checks, where it's just you roll a specific resistance check against whatever creature is attacking you or whatever is trying to inflict some kind of harm on you, and if you win, then it's great, you take no damage, you're not, you know, certain things you will be forced around on the map because of how it consumes specific areas, but a lot of times you're just going to be standing there not taking any damage. Basically, you're going to be dodging it in a way. It's going to be beautiful. Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments. Also, be sure to check that description for links to Facebook, Discord, and Twitter. Those are the places to contact me. I'll also have a link to the most recent master document if you're interested in getting your hands on this and trying this for yourself. If you haven't already, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. If you've already subscribed to the channel, then consider hitting that join button to become one of the 256 crew members. Lastly, on Thursdays and also on Sundays, I will be streaming here on YouTube, so if you are interested and available, please feel free to stop by and say hello there. Thanks for watching, guys.